The village in it with a map and a plan. No place too tiny for this determined man. Crossing the counties one by one, he'll see in every English corner a bit of history.
Hello folks, welcome to Cheshire West and Chester for the very first time. We're back in Cheshire for the first time in absolutely ages. It's been a long time since I've been in this part of the country, and look who's joining me in this particular episode. I have the wife with me. Say hello, Nikki.
Hello, Nikki.
Hello, Nikki. Now, long-time viewers will know Nikki, but if you're new, and I suspect there's going to be plenty of people out there who are watching me right now, this is Nikki, this is the wife, who will be providing me with a bit of help in this episode, and tomorrow's episode as well, which is also within Chester. Now, we're going to start with potentially what is the smallest parish in Cheshire, and it's right in the heart of Chester city centre. Believe it or not, Chester Castle is its own civil parish. Chester Castle, Roman fort. Hello everyone in Chester, it's the first time we've touched your beautiful city on TVI. It won't be the last, but we won't be here many times. Most of Chester is an unparished area, forming the biggest urban chunk of the Cheshire West and Chester district. Some of the city's outskirts are parishes though, and we'll of course cover them all in due course. Rather oddly though, Chester has a parish right in the city centre, a tiny area on the banks of the River Dee. It belongs to Chester Castle, making this one of the most unusual anywhere in the country. Now, as the name suggests, there is indeed a castle here. Chester Castle lies at the southwestern extremity of the ancient Roman city, bounded in part by the city walls. It overlooks the Dee because it sits on a tallish mound, not uncommon for a castle anywhere in the country. What makes this castle a little more special though is the fact that it has over the years gained some extra buildings. Sitting within the castle complex as it's known, there's a building belonging to the University of Chester, there's a military museum, and perhaps most importantly, there's Chester Crown Court. It was at that court where one of the UK's most well-known criminal trials took place, that of the Moors murderers Ian Brady and Myra Hindley. We'll be discussing all of that in this video. It's a very unusual episode this, nothing like what we've become accustomed to over the last 4 years. Let's go for a little wander around what is the most peculiar parish in all of Cheshire. This might be a really odd little parish right in the heart of an urban area, but Chester Castle is a distinct complex of buildings grouped together on the banks of the River Dee. The most historically important of the lot is the castle itself. Chester Castle is sited at the southwestern extremity of the area bounded by the city walls. It stands on an eminence overlooking the River Dee, close to a collection of neoclassical buildings designed by Thomas Harrison, all built between 1788 and 1813. To enter the complex, you have to pass through Harrison's Propylaeum. This Grade 1 listed building is the ceremonial entrance to the castle. It's a massive entablature supported on widely spaced Doric columns, and it's flanked by temple-like lodges. This in itself is a thing of beauty. This is Chester Castle. It's built of sandstone ashlar with a metal roof in 3 stories. It was constructed in 1070 by Hugh de Vranches, the 2nd Earl of Chester. It's possible, but not known for sure, that it was built on the site of an earlier Saxon fortification. The original structure would have been a Motte and Bailey job with a wooden tower. In the 12th century, the wooden tower was replaced by one made of square stone. During the same century, the stone gateway to the Inner Bailey was built. This is now known as the Agricola Tower, and on its first floor is the chapel of St Mary de Castro. In the 13th century, the walls of an outer bailey were built, the gateway in the Agricola Tower was blocked up, and residential accommodation, including a great hall, was built along the south wall of the Inner Bailey. Outside the Outer Bailey Gate was an area known as the Gloverston, where criminals waiting for execution were handed over to the city authorities. The Agricola Tower has had a few functions. One of them was as a prison or a dungeon. Prominent people held as prisoners in the crypt were Richard II and Eleanor Cobham, the wife of Humphrey, Duke of Gloucester. Andrew de Moray, the hero of the Battle of Stirling Bridge, also did some time in the tower. During the Wars of the Roses, Yorkist John Neville, the first Marquess of Montague, was captured and imprisoned at the castle by Lancastrians following the Battle of Blore Heath near the town of Market Drayton in Shropshire. In 1873, a system of recruiting areas based on the English counties was instituted under the Cardwell Reforms. Here in Chester, the castle became the depot for the 2 battalions of the 22nd Cheshire Regiment of Foot. They eventually evolved to become the Cheshire Regiment, and their depot was based in the castle from 1881 onwards. In 1925, after being used for 200 years as a warehouse and ammunition store, the crypt and chapel in the Agricola Tower were reconsecrated by the Bishop of Chester for the use of the regiment. The castle remained their base until 1939, when they moved out to Dale Barracks. So far, we've seen most of the castle from a distance. We've been looking at it from the city walls, which you can walk on. Chester's city walls are a defensive structure built by the Romans originally. Their construction was part of their establishment of Chester as a fortress. They called it Diva Victrix, and it was founded in the 1st century AD. It originated with a rampart of earth and turf surmounted by a wooden palisade. From about 100 AD, the walls were reconstructed using sandstone, but were not completed until over a century later. Following the Roman occupation, nothing is known about the condition of the walls until Chester was refounded as a burh in 907 AD. After the Norman conquest, the walls were extended to the west and the south to form a complete circuit of the medieval city. Although they were further fortified before the English Civil War, they were severely damaged during it. Following this, they ceased to have a defensive purpose and were soon developed for leisure and recreation. The walls are now a major tourist attraction, and you can walk along them for the entire circuit, an amble whose length stretches to almost 2 miles. So, how were they damaged, you ask? Well, for that we need to talk a little bit about the Siege of Chester. During the Civil War, Chester was held by the Royalists. The castle was assaulted by parliamentary forces in July 1643 and again in January and April 1645. Then, together with the rest of the city, it was besieged over a 16-month period between September 1644 and February 1646. In the engagement, Sir William Brereton and the parliamentarians were ultimately successful in taking possession of the city and the Royalist garrison commanded by Lord Byron. Chester was especially important to the Royalists as its location on the River Dee and proximity to the Irish Sea made it an important gateway between Ireland and North Wales. It was, of course, heavily protected by the strong Roman city walls, so that aided the Royalists' cause. When the Civil War broke out, they even added a ring of earthwork defences extending out and around portions of the city to the north and east, but it still wasn't enough. Brereton had already taken control of some of Chester's external outposts by late 1644. After Lord Byron rejected his summons for the city to surrender, the loose or partial siege of the city began. During this time, Brereton did what he could to stop the flow of provisions and munitions into the city. However, his force was not large enough to put a total blockade into effect. So, as a result, warfare continued outside the city mainly. On the 20th of September 1645, just before daylight, a new model army force of more than 700 infantry and an equal number of cavalry, led by Colonel Michael Jones, began a major assault on Chester. The attack broke through the outer Royalist earthworks in the eastern suburbs. After Jones had ordered the burning of the urban areas in front of the East Gate, he moved artillery up to St John the Baptist Church to bombard the city wall. By the 22nd of September, Jones's guns had already created a breach in Chester's walls. After receiving the news of the attack, King Charles set out for Chester with a brigade of some 600 horses and a small number of foot soldiers. These forces were able to enter the city from the western bank of the River Dee, as it was still under Royalist control. Charles remained in Chester overnight, but on the 25th of September he broke away with a force of 500 mounted troopers and rode to Denbigh in North Wales. Byron remained behind with the Royalist garrison at Chester. That same morning, the parliamentarians continued the relentless bombardment. By the next day, it had created a breach in the city wall at Newgate, but they still couldn't force their way in completely. The siege would continue for 3 months, during which the royalists would not surrender nor consider terms. During this time, many inhabitants died of starvation. In January 1646, William Ince, the mayor of Chester, persuaded Byron to consider terms to prevent any further loss of life. Negotiations began on the 20th of January and were over by the 1st of February. 2 days later, Brereton and the parliamentarians finally occupied Chester. The city suffered a great deal during the siege. In addition to the loss of life that occurred, many buildings, including dwellings, mansions, barns, workhouses, dairy houses, halls and chapels, were destroyed. Many churches were severely damaged, and the city's funds were totally exhausted. Within the neoclassical complex of buildings that adjoin the castle today is the Wheeler Building. This is part of the University of Chester, which has other buildings across the city. The Wheeler Building is named after its former Vice-Chancellor, Timothy Wheeler, who retired in 2019. The university originated as the first purpose-built teacher training college in the UK. It now occupies 5 campus sites in and around Chester, 1 in Warrington, and a university centre in Shrewsbury. A 2021 article in Times Higher Education described the University of Chester as being the 5th oldest establishment of its kind in England, with only the universities of Oxford, Cambridge, Durham and London predating it. In 1921 it became an affiliated college of the University of Liverpool, which means essentially that Liverpool award Chester's qualifications. It also means Chester students are able to use Liverpool's facilities. The list of Chester's notable alumni is quite something to behold. It includes household names such as the Welsh songstress Duffy, the radio presenter Comedy Dave, and the comedian and Bullseye legend Jim Bowen. Most of Chester's 14,900 students are from the United Kingdom. A quarter of them are mature, and there are twice as many female students as male. The reason for that is partially due to the number of nursing, midwifery and teaching students it has. One of them hit the news in a big way, and for a sickeningly terrible reason, not long ago. We'll talk more about her though tomorrow. Now we're coming back into the middle of the complex, and this is the Cheshire Military Museum, which has been here since 1972. It covers the history of the British Army regiments connected with the county of Cheshire from 1685 onwards. These are the Cheshire Regiment, the Cheshire Yeomanry, the 3rd Carabiniers, the 5th Royal Inniskilling Dragoon Guards, and also the Eton Hall Officer Cadet School. The museum tells the story of Cheshire soldiers from the 17th century to the present day. For hundreds of years, Cheshire soldiers have fought in conflicts which have significantly shaped world history. The museum contains a huge diversity of material to tell their stories. These include a very rare pre-1830 cavalry cape, one of only 3 known in the UK. It was worn by Sergeant Carline of the Carabiniers. The Victoria Cross, won by Thomas Alfred Jones, who took 102 German prisoners, is also on display here, as is the helmet he wore on that day, complete with a bullet hole. The pen, used to sign the Japanese surrender at the end of World War II, is in here as well. Another building in this series of imposing structures within the complex is Chester Crown Court. Like the museum, this too is a Grade 1 listed building. The current building replaced a previous Shire Hall which had been built just outside the castle's main gate in 1310, but that was in a derelict state by the late 18th century. In 1785, the justices insisted that an architectural competition be held for a new Shire Hall, as well as a new prison to be located behind it. The site selected for the new complex formed part of the Outer Bailey of the castle. Work on the new complex began with the demolition of the old buildings in 1788. The design involved a symmetrical main frontage with 19 bays facing onto Castle Square, with the end bays projecting forward slightly. Internally, the principal space was an imposing main courtroom inspired by the School of Anatomy in Paris. Famous trials to have taken place at Chester Crown Court have included those of Peter Rain Bart, accused of murdering his estranged wife Melika de Fernandez in December 1983. The court also saw the trial and conviction of Howard Hughes for the murder of Sophie Hook in June 1996. However, one famous trial that took place here stands head and shoulders above all the others.
So we are currently round the back of the castle and the Chester Assizes. Round here because it's a little bit quieter and we don't really want to draw any attention to ourselves. So for those of you that may or may not know, I am really into my true crime. And most of the time these days when you hear of a big trial, it takes place at the Old Bailey or somewhere like that. However, Chester Assizes is notable for the trial of the century, from the crime of the century, the notorious criminals of the century. The Ian Brady and Myra Hindley were tried here in the 1960s for their crimes, and this is where they received their sentences to spend the rest of their lives behind bars.
Brady and Hindley, or the Moors murderers, were convicted of a series of killings in and around Manchester between July 1963 and October 1965. The victims were 5 children: Pauline Reed, John Kilbride, Keith Bennett, Leslie Ann Downey and Edward Evans. They were all aged between 10 and 17. The bodies of 2 of the victims were discovered in 1965 in a grave dug on Saddleworth Moor. A third grave was discovered there in 1987, more than 20 years after Brady and Hindley's trial. Bennett's body is also thought to be buried there, but despite repeated searches, it remains undiscovered to this day. The pair were charged only for the murders of Kilbride, Downey and Evans and received life sentences under a whole life tariff. Characterised by the press as the most evil woman in Britain, Hindley made several appeals against her life sentence but was never released. Brady was diagnosed as a psychopath in 1985 and confined to the high-security Ashworth Hospital. He made it clear that he wished never to be released and repeatedly asked to be allowed to die. He eventually did in 2017 at Ashworth, aged 79, having served 51 years. Now, as far as the murders themselves go, Saddleworth is a parish we've yet to cover on TVI, so it makes more sense to talk about them when we get there. Let's focus more on their trial here. Now, if you don't know, Saddleworth is in Oldham, so why did the murderer's trial take place in Chester, several miles away and in a different county? Well, it was all to do with the coverage of it all. Such was the nature of the crimes and the interest in the case by the media, it was decided that any sort of trial in Manchester would be extremely risky. Even in Chester, there were incredibly unusual measures taken. The trial lasted 14 days. It was conducted in a specially prepared courtroom where the dock was fitted with bulletproof glass to protect Brady and Hindley. This is because it was feared that someone might try to kill them, such was the public outrage at the crimes. Other elaborate security precautions included a public address system costing £2,500 and £500 worth of telephone equipment. National and international journalists covering the trial booked up most of the city's hotel rooms. Both Brady and Hindley entered pleas of not guilty. Brady testified for over 8 hours and Hindley for 6. Their efforts were futile. On the 6th of May, after having deliberated for a little over 2 hours, the jury found Brady guilty of all 3 murders and Hindley guilty of 2. As the death penalty for murder had been abolished only 6 months earlier, the judge passed the only sentence that the law could allow: life imprisonment. Brady was taken to HM Prison Durham and Hindley was sent to HM Prison Holloway. In his closing remarks, Mr. Justice Atkinson described the murders as truly horrible and the accused as 2 sadistic killers of the utmost depravity. He described Brady as wicked beyond belief and said he saw no reasonable possibility of reform and suitability for parole for him, though he did not think the same necessarily true of Hindley once removed from Brady's influence. Throughout the trial, Brady and Hindley stuck rigidly to their strategy of lying, and Hindley was later described as a quiet, controlled, impassive witness who lied remorselessly. Returning to the front of the court building, our last job is to check out this statue which commemorates the life of Queen Victoria. It was unveiled in 1903 and its sculptor was Frederick William Pomeroy. The money for the statue was raised by public subscription, with about 1/3 being raised in the city of Chester and the remaining amount from elsewhere in the county. Its total cost was £1,360, excluding the cost of the foundations. The bronze statue was made in the foundry of Hollinshead and Burton in Thames Ditton, Surrey. The designer of the stonework was Henry Beswick, and the stonemasons were Haswell and Sons of Chester. The statue is of bronze and depicts Queen Victoria standing and holding the orb and sceptre. The Queen is dressed in coronation robes, wearing a lace headdress and the imperial crown. The figure stands on a pedestal of Stancliffe stone and a base of granite. In all, it's about 5.4 feet tall, and on the sides of the pedestal are the arms of the city and the county. And having made it around the Chester Castle complex, we are done with one of the most unusual parishes in the country. Now tomorrow we're off to another one that's a little odd. North of the city there's a second parish that's linked to a major British criminal. Come back tomorrow and we'll learn a little bit more about her. Now, just before I go, remember, this video is part of a huge project to visit every civil parish in England. That's more than 10,000. These routes are pre-planned, and due to time constraints, I can't cover every detail or walk down every street. Please don't complain if this video missed something out. I pronounce names how I choose to. I am very aware that local dialect may vary, and I don't take kindly to criticism about this. You've been warned. It's impossible to know everything too. If this video was terrible, make your own. If you're a regular watcher of The Village Idiot, you're not the only one. If you've got a small business, why not use my videos to advertise it? Leave a comment below if you're interested. And finally, thanks for watching this episode, everybody. Give us a like and a subscribe if you've enjoyed this episode, and share it with your friends and relatives. It all helps to keep this mission going. Until next time, I've been Andy, also known as The Village Idiot, and I'm out.